last and final prophet of Allah. He was a mercy unto the universe. Peace and blessings be on Al-Mustafa. So he began this perfect man.
Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you, and welcome to Hadith Principles. We're learning about the principles of studying the Hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, and the important role that it plays in analyzing and studying the prophetic Hadith in order to secure an authentic transmission of the Prophet Muhammad's teaching to us as a source of understanding our religion, both its beliefs and practices. We're talking about the Sahih, authentic Hadith of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. Without the preservation of the Sahih, the authentic Hadith, we would not have a source for understanding or implementing the teachings of the Quran. And it would not be, as the Muslim ulama or scholars have pointed out, it would not be possible for us to know where did we learn how to pray, where is the source of the teaching about zakat or how to make the pilgrimage, and many, many other aspects of the details of Islam. And so many other religious traditions have their own ways of worship and their own customs and traditions, but they don't know who developed them. They can't trace it back to its origin. And so that is the blessing that has been delivered to us by our diligent scholars over the centuries and millennia in Islam. May Allah Almighty bless all who have participated in preserving the Hadith Nabawi for all of us. We're talking about the authentic Hadith, the Sahih. And I'm going to read a Hadith of the Prophet and ask some of our guest panel about some of these Hadiths. We have with us here Brother Muhammad from the United States of America, Brother Hussam from Egypt, and Ayman also from the United States. Welcome, guys, inshallah. I'm glad you're here to help me. And inshallah, we're going to discuss some of these Hadiths. There's a famous Hadith, maybe you guys have heard it, you can tell me. It's about the 99 names of Allah Almighty. And the Prophet said, Man ahsaha dakhal al-jannah. Whoever enumerates those names will enter paradise. Hu Allah la ilaha illa hu ar-Rahman ar-Rahim al-Malak al-Qudus al-Salam. Anybody heard about that Hadith, inshallah? I'm not going to name all of them. There are different versions that give not all the exact same names or the asma, names of Allah Almighty. Anybody heard that Hadith?
I heard of it, but I don't know if it's sahih or not.
Okay, what do you think?
I think
Hassan,
maybe?
I think it's sahih because
We can't really guess, but that's all right. That's a good guess.
They have a show on Huda where the Sheikh is doing the 99 names, so maybe it's got some...
Well, first of all, if you look at the different versions of those Hadith, they're not all the same 99 names. And there are names in the Quran that aren't always in those Hadith. And there are names also in Hadith that are not in... So for sure there are more than 99 names.
Yes.
In fact, if you look in Sahih Bukhari as well as Sahih Muslim, you find that Hadith. The 99 names, whoever enumerates them will enter paradise. And that's it. The part that comes after, that you will find in At-Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, and Al-Hakim, and others, which enumerates all those names and details, that part is da'if. That part is weak. And that's why it's not found in Bukhari and Muslim. Only the first part of the Hadith is found in Bukhari and Muslim. The other part is not from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Imam At-Tirmidhi says in the Sunan, after mentioning this Hadith, this version of the Hadith, that is with all the names named, is gharib. So what's gharib mean? Anybody remember?
Yes, which is narrated by two and one of its...
only one person.
One person,
So
yes.
at least one leak, there's only one link there in the Hadith.
I think it's a category of the one-man narratives, of the ahad positions.
It is, ahad hadith is any hadith that is not mutawatir. That is, it may have two people or three or one, but the gharib hadith, there's only one person in at least one part of the link of that hadith. So he said, Imam Tirmidhi says, it's gharib. It has been narrated from various routes on the authority of Abu Huraira. We do not know of the mention of the names in the numerous narrations except this one. And so this is one person who is mentioning something that nobody else knows. And Ibn Taymiyyah talks about that person. Because we said, if he's one person, and he mentions something, and he's thiqah, he's trustworthy, then that's called what?
Munkar.
No. If he's trustworthy, and he mentions something in addition.
Shaz.
No, exactly the opposite. That's called ziyadatu thiqa. That is, a trustworthy source adds something to the hadith which is not, there's nothing wrong with it. So maybe some of them just narrated part of the hadith, and some of them narrated the whole hadith. But what does Ibn Taymiyyah say about it? He says, he is al-Walid, and he related the names from the saying of one of his Syrian teachers. So this guy is adding words to the hadith. First, he mentions the hadith of the Prophet, then he adds the words of his teacher. So what's that called?
Tadlis.
No. Idraj. Idraj means you add the words of somebody else to the hadith. And so he added the words of his teacher, naming off names of Allah Almighty. And so the specific mention of the names is not from the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Ibn Kathir, in his tafsir, under verse 180 of Al-Araf, says these narrations are mudraj. And Ibn Hajar says similar thing in Fath al-Bari, his commentary on Sahih al-Bukhari. And so there are different versions which mention those names, but that is not of the saying of the Prophet ﷺ. So the hadith is the part that is in Bukhari and Muslim. And so it means whoever will, perhaps, and Allah knows best, whoever learns those names and understands their meaning and implements the meaning of those names will enter paradise. So without doubt, if you know Allah, His attributes, and His names, and you act according to that, then you are a believer, and all believers will enter paradise. It doesn't mean if you sit there counting these names, and you have 99 beads, and you count all the names, you will enter paradise. Because anybody, a non-believer, could say those names.
Yeah.
That wouldn't mean if you could train a parrot to say those names. It doesn't mean anything. So people think if you just say something or you do this little thing, counting it 99 times, you'll enter paradise. But that's not what the hadith means, and Allah knows best. Okay, I'll tell you another hadith. I don't know if you've heard about this. Praying in your shoes.
In your
Okay, are you allowed to enter in a mosque with your shoes on?
No.
Nowadays, no.
Yeah, nowadays no. Okay. But there's a hadith that the Prophet entered into the mosque and he looked at the bottom of his shoes to make sure there's nothing unclean.
Yes.
And he prayed in his shoes after that.
Because the mosque was outside. Then,
Yes, exactly right. It's because the mosque was gravel. There were some, in the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ, most of it was uncovered. And there was one portion, the sufa, in the back that was covered. And one portion toward the Qibla, toward Makkah, that was covered. And there were some mats made of reeds, on the ground. But most of the mosque, it was made of basically gravel or dirt. And so there are many hadiths that talk about, for example, the Arabi, the ignorant Bedouin came and urinated.
Yeah.
And so they just poured water on it because the ground is absorbent. And so if they urinated on the carpet of a mosque, you couldn't just pour water. You have to dry it out and remove all that from there. And so in the hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, while Allah's Messenger ﷺ was praying with his companions, suddenly he took off his shoes and placed them on his left. In the middle of Salah, he took off his shoes and placed them on the left. So when the people saw that, they all took off their shoes. Because they saw the Prophet take off his shoes. So they thought, taking off your shoes must be commanded by Jibreel. So when the people saw that, they threw off his shoes. So when the Prophet ﷺ was finished with his prayer, he said, why did you throw off your shoes? And they said, we saw you throw off your shoes, so we threw our shoes off. And so Allah's Messenger, peace and blessing be upon him, said, Angel Gabriel, alayhi salam, came to me and informed me that my shoes contained impurity. And he said, when one of you comes to the mosque, then let him look. And if he finds any impurity on the bottom of his shoe, then let him wipe it and pray in them, as reported by Imam Ahmed and Abu Dawood and others, with a sahih isnad, as Shaykh al-Albani says in Irwa al-Ghalil. He authenticates the hadith. And so when I'm outdoors or on a floor, bare floor, and everybody's walking on the floor with their shoes, I have no problem. I can pray in my shoes. Yeah. But of course, why don't we let Muslims pray in the mosque with their shoes on? Because we're praying on the carpet, we're kneeling,
yes, to keep it
and
clean.
If we let the people come in with their shoes, it'll be filthy.
Yes.
And the ignorant people will be, making the mosque very unpleasant and unclean. And so there's some brothers today who think they're following the Salaf or following the early leaders of Islam and following the Sunnah of the Prophet. So they're insisting on walking into the mosque with their shoes. And so they're creating a fitna and chaos in the mosque. And so people are really disturbed and they don't understand that. But common Muslims think that it's a requirement to take off your shoes. And so sometimes we'll pray outdoors. And we'll see we're in the grass or something and everybody will take off their shoes. And they don't know better. But you can pray with your shoes on. But if you've been walking where perhaps there might be, a dog or something else. They used to have in the streets, dirty things would be in the streets. So you've got to check the bottom of your shoes before the prayer, inshallah, by the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We also have what are called the Hasan hadith. And Hasan hadith is like the grade B hadith. And the Hasan, let me read you some of the definition. Imam Tirmidhi says, and he's really the first one who talked about Hasan. A hadith which is not shadh, it's not contradictory to a better hadith, and it does not contain a reporter that has been accused of being a liar or anything in its isnad, and it's been reported through more than one narration. He considers that to be a Hasan hadith, but not on the level of a Sahih hadith, inshallah. Khattabi states, it is where its source is known, the source of the hadith is known, whether it's from the Prophet through continuous narration, and its reporters are known, unambiguous. We'll go to a break and we'll be back shortly. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Muhammad is the last and final prophet of Allah.
Now we're going to answer and deal with some of the misconceptions about Islam. What do we say and how do we answer some of the questions?
Jihad, sabilillah, when you look to the Quran, and there's your proof, you find Jihad, sabilillah can be many different things.
In war, what does Islam mean? Is Islam peace or is Islam war?
What about the groups, the differences between the groups? The obvious differences between the groups.
But how did you pray? And more important, to whom did you pray? Because if the prayer was to other than Allah, then it's not acceptable.
Dear viewers, Hoda programs can be watched in the English section of the in-flight entertainment directory on board all Saudi airline flights, domestic and international. Sit back, relax and enjoy watching Hoda's entertaining and enlightening shows on your trip. Hoda wishes you a safe and successful journey. Hoda, a light in every home.
Muhammad is the last and final prophet of Allah.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Hadith Principles. We're talking about the Hasan Hadith and the difference between a Hasan and a Sahih or authentic Hadith. We talked about quite a lot of detail about the Sahih Hadith, and they are really the foundation of our study of Islam. The second category, we said really those are grade A hadiths, and that's just my own terminology. I didn't consult with any of the great scholars about my own idea there. The Hasan hadith then, it's less than that. It's the grade B hadith. It's the okay hadith. It's a good hadith, inshallah. But we're going to discuss what makes the difference between the Hasan and the Sahih. And so Imam Tirmidhi said it's not shadh, and the reporter has not been declared to be a liar, but there may be some other minor weakness, like memory issue. But there's other narrations that back that up. Okay? And so it's not shadh. And what's shadh mean?
Contradiction.
It's contradicting a more authentic hadith. It can't be shadh. And it's mutasal, it's continuous. And the reporters are known. They're not liars or accused of forgery or changing the meaning of hadith. But say, for example, they have a memory problem, like the suduq is a trustworthy person who has, like, for example, his memory sheikh. He's not as well known, but there's other backup evidence for that. So if this person was weak, there is other evidence that would support that hadith, inshallah.
Which is shahid.
Huh?
Shahid.
Yes, a shahid, exactly, a witness. There are other witnesses or other proofs that makes this hadith not to be considered weak. But if the person was, for example, mudallis, known to hide his sources and confuse people about his sources, or if there was an illah, a hidden defect, then it wouldn't be considered hasan, inshallah. Ibn Salah classifies the hasan into two categories. One containing a reporter who is not very well known, but he is not totally careless in his reporting. That is, he hasn't been reporting inaccurately, shadh, hadith. He's not contradicting more well-known people. But he himself isn't well-known as a narrator of sahih hadiths. But that is on the condition that there are similar texts to back that up. And another group with an isnad containing a reporter who is known to be truthful and reliable, but he doesn't have the same degree of dhabt, memory or preservation of hadith as would be required for the sahih hadith. And so both of those cannot have any shulud, they cannot be contradictory to something that is better than that, inshallah. And so it's a hadith that is not da'if, it's not weak, but it is not up to the level of the sahih hadith. There are a lot of examples of the hasan hadiths. Imam Malik in the Muwatta, Abu Dawud and Tirmidhi, Al-Hakim report from Ammar ibn Shu'aib, from his father, from his grandfather, that the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessing be upon him, said, a single rider or traveler is a shaitan. 2 riders are 2 shaitans. And 3 make a traveling party. This is, Imam Tirmidhi says, this hadith is hasan because of the above isnad. Because this chain, Ammar ibn Shu'aib on his father and grandfather, it is not meeting the requirement of sahih. And so, because of the reporters, it is a hasan hadith. That means that when you're alone, you might be, negligent of your religion. You might be in danger of your life and property and not be able to defend yourself. And shaitan can tempt you. And when there are 2 people, the same. But 3 people, each one sort of enforces and strengthens the other one. And so it's recommended in Islam that you do things together as a group of brothers who can support one another. Instead of being in isolation, Allah knows best, where you might be in danger of temptation from shaitan. I'm going to ask the brothers to introduce themselves, and we can discuss some hadiths together, inshallah. I can introduce you, Brother Muhammad from the United States.
Mamdouh from the United States. I did have a question about the hadith that you mentioned with the 99 names, when there was the addition of the 99 names. Why didn't they just make it 2 hadith? Like, why didn't he have 2 separate...
Okay, because he was narrating from his teacher, and his teacher, after saying the 99 names, his teacher gave his opinion what those 99 names were. Okay. Then he repeated that as if it were the hadith of the Prophet, and it was not. Okay?
Yes, clear.
Okay.
Okay, I'll give you an example of hadith. Seeking knowledge is a duty upon a fard, upon every Muslim.
Yes. طلب العلم فريضة على كل مسلم.
Yes. Seeking knowledge is a fard or farida, mandatory duty upon every Muslim. This hadith has many chains of narration from more than 12 companions of the Prophet and 20 tabi'een, 20 of the second generation, reporting, at least claiming to report from Anas ibn Malik. These are found in Ibn Majah, Al-Bayhaqi, Al-Tabarani, but all of them are da'if, according to Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal and other scholars, like Ibn Abdul Barr. He is the great muhaddith, or scholar of hadith, of Spain, when Spain was under the Islamic community, and Al-Bazar and others. And so this, Al-Bayhaqi says, this is a very famous hadith, but all of them are da'if. But in fact, when you put all of them together, as Al-Iraqi, Al-Mizzi, Ibn Hajar, Suyuti, and Imam Al-Albani say, when you put all of those weak ones together, they support each other. Because the meaning is correct meaning. There's nothing wrong. It's not contradictory to any other hadith. And of course, you can understand in Islam, what's the first duty of a Muslim? What's our first duty as a Muslim?
Read. As in the Quran, read.
Yeah.
To seek knowledge.
Yeah, but read what? Our duty is to obey Allah.
Yes.
To obey Allah, of course, you can't follow the commandment of Allah till you obey Him. And so you have to know Allah, you have to know your religion. And so knowledge is the first thing before anything else. You can't worship Allah without knowledge. You don't know how to pray, you don't know how to fast. And so, without doubt, this meaning is correct. And so, there, as I said, dozens of narrations from companions of this meaning. Yes, they're not any of them strong, but they all back each other up. And so that is Hasan li ghayrihi. Ghayrihi means it's Hasan because it's supported by other narrations. So I'm going to say that was originally da'if, it was weak. And so a da'if hadith, I give it an F. I give it a D. But because there's so many of them, they back each other up. They couldn't have all met together and planned this lie as an elaborate hoax. And so it's a good C hadith. It's an okay hadith. It's not a bad hadith at all. You also hear this hadith. Seek knowledge even if you have to go to China. Yes. It's actually part of this same hadith. It's an addition onto this hadith. And that is found in a few narrations of this previous hadith. It's not its own hadith. So it's this same hadith, but then it adds, even in China. And that part is weak. And in fact, Ibn Hibban and Ibn al-Jawzi declared this mawdu'. So Ibn al-Jawzi has his book about where he collects mawdu' hadiths, the fabricated hadiths together, and he includes that in that hadith. And so the end of the hadith is not the hadith of the Prophet, the part about going to China. Nothing wrong with China. And if there's knowledge in China, there's nothing wrong with it. But it's just something, you hear it quoted all the time. I'm sure you must have heard that. Any other questions about the Hasan right now?
How about for the people that have doubts about all the hadiths, about Sahih and Da'if and stuff like that? How does the hadith terminology compare to the sources of other historical figures?
Well, he said, how do we know, what did Jesus say? What did Moses say? What are the sources? You can't trace back any source to any of those people. And so if you were to put the conditions by which we determine a Sahih hadith, it would cancel out every other religious tradition and much of history that we know. And so in fact, the existence of da'if hadiths proves the authentic hadiths. The fact that we can distinguish what is authentic and not, that proves that we have authentic. If we didn't know the difference, then people could accuse Islam of something. And so if you were to apply these standards on any other religion, you would cancel out that whole religion. There would be nothing to meet these sources. And so the fact that we have these gradings of hadith, that we have applied critical principles of scholarship to examining this literature in an objective way, is an additional proof, insha'Allah, of the authenticity of the teachings of Islam. May Allah Almighty cause us to be guided by the light of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Barakallahu feekum, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Muhammad is the last and final prophet of Allah. He was a mercy unto the universe. Peace and blessings be on Al-Mustafa. So he began this perfect man, sending his word across the land, leading only by his sunnah and the Quran, the word of Allah. He brought the answer to this cruel world, our beloved Prophet Muhammad.